And I'm very pleased that I can welcome our distinguished panel here via Zoom. Thanks so much, all of you, for joining us. We want to talk about food security and smallholder farmers. And for that, we've invited Professor Dr. Joachim von Braun. He's economist and director of the Center for Development Research and chair of the scientific group of the UN Food Systems Summit 2021, which is coming up. His core research is on economic development and poverty reduction, food and nutrition security, among others. Now, he says that without sufficient action, there will be a brutal increase of mortality among the poorest of the poor, and that could ultimately lead to destabilization of fragile states. That's because the pandemic and its effects are threatening to double the number of people on the brink of starvation to 265 million. I'm pleased to welcome Arif Husain, chief economist at the UN World Food Programme. Before, he also worked at the World Bank, and his research focuses on analyzing food security and welfare conditions in developing countries to inform humanitarian response. He recently warned what is unique about this time is that prices are going up, and at the same time, people's incomes have been decimated. We'll talk about the impact of that in just a moment. Dr. Jacqueline Mkindi is with us. She's CEO of the TAHA group of the Tanzanian Horticultural Association and board member of the Agricultural Council of Tanzania. There, she's been helping to shape and transform the multi-million-dollar horticultural industry in Tanzania and has been fostering strategic partnerships between producers and industry. We'll certainly be talking a lot about that. And I'm pleased to welcome Rodger Voorhies. He's the president of the Global Growth and Opportunity Division of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He leads the foundation's efforts to alleviate hunger and poverty for millions of farming families in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia by increasing agricultural productivity in a sustainable way. He took this role coming from a financial services background. And he says, as we emerge from the pandemic, governments have an opportunity to use lessons from the crisis to build the inclusive financial systems they will need to respond to future economic crises. We'll get more details on that in a moment. But first of all, I want to address Professor Dr. Joachim von Braun. Let's just look at the results of our survey and talk about what people were saying who've tuned in. I asked all of you just a moment ago, how many people are globally suffering from food insecurity and don't have access to enough or safe food? And this is how you voted, and you voted correct. 56% said it's 746 million people. Yes, that is a huge number. That shocks a lot of people. Professor von Braun, why is this so high, and how much does the pandemic already play into this figure?
Well, thank you for having us. This is a very important moment to discuss the topic before us. Let me add two other numbers to the shocking number which your listeners have rightly picked. 3 billion people do not have access to a healthy diet. 1.5 billion people do not have the resources to afford a diet which has the essential nutrients. So the nutrition problem is even bigger than the hunger problem, and the two feed into each other. That's why what Jackie works on, the vegetables, is so important, that we produce and make accessible, healthy diets. I think, as Minister Müller pointed out, the Food Systems Summit is a major opportunity. But we need to enter the agenda for the Food Systems Summit with an agenda for science. If we don't change the acceleration of investment and application of science, and I mean natural science and social science, the food system remains doomed. We have mapped out 7 science action areas that the summit should address in order to bring these numbers down. And they can be brought down Minister Müller mentioned the investment needs. It's between 39 and 50 billion addition per annum to bring us close to a zero hunger situation in 10 years. So the 7, just in brief buzzwords: science to end hunger and improve accessibility of healthy diets, number 1. Number 2, de-risk the food system, the pandemic, which has adding probably about 150 million, you asked that question, 150 million people on top of what the listeners have said. 3, the labor credit and land arrangements need to become fair. 4, mobilize the bioscience. 5th, overcome degradation of soil, water, and biodiversity. 6, this is not only about land. The aquaculture, the oceans need to be part of the agenda. And 7th, the digital opportunity. Let me stop there.
Jacqueline Mkindi, I would like to bring you in on that, because we also just heard from Minister Müller that Europe must must actually take up responsibility, that the sustainability goals must be expanded to Africa. And I would like to draw this together actually with a question we had in advance from one of our participants, Rafael Lugada, who said, what global support do African farmers need to boost world food output? And another one that asks, what do farmers need in terms of policy, particularly smallhold farmers, to make their livelihoods more sustainable?
Yes, thank you very much for the 2 questions. So I will start responding to the first question about, what needs to be done to boost farmers' productivity. Is that the question? Did I get you right? Yeah?
Yes, and what kind of responsibility Europe has? What kind of policy or assistance do you expect to particularly support the role of small farmers in Tanzania, but on the whole continent?
Yeah, thank you very much. As we know, still African agriculture is still the driver of the economic transformation of most of the African countries. And of course, it's the industry that employs quite a number of the population in Africa. More than 65% of the population in Africa is actually in agriculture. So the contribution of agriculture towards, socio-economic development is very significant, but still the industry is highly vulnerable. And there are a number of interventions that are still needed to boost, or to accelerate or to enhance the position of farmer across the agricultural value chain. Of course, one is to do with access to technology, because most of African farmers, including those who are in Tanzania, are still suffering from, low productivity, which is attributed to poor access to, productive resources, but also poor access to technology. So we really have to make sure that, we are creating enabling environment that would facilitate not only access, but also, the availability and affordability of, right innovations and technologies to support, farmers boost or improve productivity. Another area that needs really to be prioritized, and this was also mentioned by Professor Joachim and also in the minister's speech, is to really place research and development at the center of the agriculture transformation agenda in our countries. We know exactly that, global climate change is real, and our farmers are at the receiving end. There are a number of shocks that our food system is going through now. And what needs to be done today is really to invest on research and development in a way that, will come up, will have this, in a way that we'll be able to respond to a number of questions that our farmers have on the field. For example, helping our farmers to come up with varieties that are resistant to new pests and diseases, varieties that have longer shelf life, and varieties that would actually give more yields to our farmers. So it is very, very important that the programs, the projects that we are coming up with or we are designing today, we are actually prioritizing R&D. Another very important agenda that we should actually look at is the issue of access to capital, access to finance. You know, it is still very, very difficult for African farmers, including farmers in Tanzania, to access what we call patient financing. Most of the commercial financial institutions in Africa, in our countries, are shying away from lending money to agriculture. So they consider agriculture as a high-risk corner, and they're not prioritizing agriculture. And so it is high time that we come up with innovative financial solutions or financial products that would really help our farmers get access to these kind of technologies and other kind of innovations. Critical to note is also enabling environment. You may expose these farmers to good technology, of course, and these other support services, but if our policies are not right, if our policies are not stable enough, if our regulatory frameworks in our countries are not pro-agriculture investments, then we have not helped the farmers. So it is very, very critical that we also, create what is called very practical public-private, kind of partnership that are aiming at improving business enabling environment or farmers enabling environment to help these farmers survive in the very challenging terrain that they operate with today. So what kind of policies should we promote? Because one, I'm talking about the right, policies and regulatory framework, but again, I'm talking about the right financial policies, because when you talk to commercial institutions, they are also governed by some policies, that cripple their operations, their support to farming system. So
Jacqueline, just stay on that point, because I'd like to bring in Arif Husain. We're talking about finance. You also come from a background of finance. I can see behind you basically the mission of the World Food Programme. It's saving lives and it's changing lives. We just heard from the German Development Minister Müller that to save those lives, we'd need 40 billion a year. How much would we need in terms of financial resources, leaving policies aside for a second, to actually change lives, to launch that kind of change that would see you not appealing for emergency funds all the time, but actually having more sustainable, reliable food systems?
No, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here, and thank you for this excellent question. And I just have to say that what I've heard so far, it's right on the money. But where I would start before we get into the money part is, why is this all happening? Why in 21st century we're talking about people dying of hunger? To be precise, 270 million people today in about 80 countries are in crisis or worse situation, food security crisis or worse situation. 41 million are in emergencies. And about 500,000 people are actually experiencing famine in 21st century. Think of South Sudan, think of Yemen, think of Madagascar, the latest, think of Burkina Faso. This is 21st century we're talking about. So why is that happening? And if there is one thing, that is conflict, wars. 100 million people, the main reason why they're hurting, why they're food insecure, is wars in about 23 countries. The second one, climate change. And then the economic marginalization. Loss of, not inequality in income alone, but inequality in opportunity. And on top of that, then you get COVID, which kind of multiplies all of this misery, basically. This is what we are looking for. So when we talk about getting to, there are two things. One is saving lives of these people who I'm talking about, and then also changing lives. So it's not saving or, it's saving while changing lives. just for World Food Program alone, to assist 139 million people this year, we need $15.3 billion. Yes, $15.3 billion. Now, what Professor Joachim was saying, this 40 billion is about changing lives. Over 10 years, if we can invest this, we can get people out of poverty and hunger. But that requires enabling conditions. That requires peace. So it's not about, you could do one and then you will do other. Unless you have peace, you cannot implement any of these things. So first we need to get to peace, and then we have to show peace dividends. And how can we do that? Is by investing in this 40 billion every year. And I would say the last thing before I stop on this question is we always ask about cost of doing something. What about the cost of not doing something? What is the cost of inaction? What have we seen when we haven't taken care of problems when they occurred? And my executive director and I, we can show very strong linkages and very strong evidence that when we don't take care of these problems when they occur, we collectively suffer. When there is conflict, there is hunger. When there is hunger, there is destabilization. When there's destabilization, there's mass migration. And then we try to solve the problem, which is way, way, way more expensive than it would be if we could deal with them up front. I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that brings me actually quite clearly to Rodger Voorhies, because the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation jumps in where there is inaction, where the cost of doing nothing is not seen as high enough by many governments, or simply the funding can't be found. Can you maybe just illustrate for us where you most feel the policy gaps are where an organization like yours is called upon?
No, thanks for the question, and it's great to be with you today. I just want to reiterate Minister Muller's point that we can end hunger and one world, no hunger. The world over the last 30 years saw the absolute number of people in poverty drop in half. And yet, as we heard from Professor von Braun and what we've heard on the ground experience from Jackie, is that number's increased, somewhere between 130 to 150 million during the pandemic. And yet the tools exist to address this in a really meaningful way. And so to your question, I'll say there are three things that we believe the world needs to invest in that are great value for money. The first one is the CGIAR, which works to create the right variety of seeds, the right variety of inputs, and the right data for smallholder farmers. And Jackie talked about getting the right seeds, the right inputs for climate change, for the environment we live in. I will just tell you, the CGIAR is a $1 billion organization. It produces 10 times, for every dollar into it, it produces $10 of benefits for low-income farmers. And we should make that a $2 billion organization by the time we get to the end of the Food System Summit, because it is transformational, and it's driven not by what I want in the US or what we want in other rich world countries, but by low-income smallholder farmers who produce 80% of the food in Africa today are asking for. The second one is something that Joachim talked about in digital data. So we've done a lot of investment in early warning systems, in data intelligence, and one of those areas, something that we've talked about a lot in terms of sustainable food systems and green growth, which is about digital soil maps. So Africa has some of the oldest soil on the world. That soil needs to understand what's the right variety to put in place, what's the right kind of care and support for that soil. And those digital soil maps are having huge impacts around what we think are sustainable practices.
How are we going to invest more in enhancing our extension services? How are we going to invest more as partners in research, seed multiplication, irrigation, and market access interventions? So if we're able to do so, we have actually helped our farming community in our countries, and we have addressed, or we have been able to attain our food and nutrition security targets.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Jacqueline Mkindi, Arif Husain from the World Food Programme, Dr. Joachim von Braun, and Rodger Voorhies from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thanks so much for joining us.